I see it live on IG.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Got Justice, Joel, and Mike here with me. Continue the conversation. I want to pick up on something actually both of you all said. You said we find our tribes on social media. Like black men cry, we fish, we run, we swim. That you mentioned, but you're talking about this idea. We do other stuff too. But yeah, we do all this, but we also cry. Right? You're talking about we cry, and you were talking about this idea. These safe spaces we can get in there and not necessarily be judged, but don't we have something sometimes to overcome in our own tribe?
Yeah, absolutely, TJ. Like, I mean, we can look at, and Mike, you kind of touched on it, like this, and it's separate thoughts, but when we talk about trauma porn, it exists because there's trauma, right? There's like, there's trauma, there's ancestral trauma that I think we're still trying to unpack. Like, slavery wasn't that long ago. Like, us being able to vote, like, that's mad new. That's not like a thing that just happened like 1,000 years ago. And so, like, I think we're in a place now where we're learning how to talk with each other. You know, I think so much of the conversations, especially as black men and those who identify as such, has been like, yo, you need to get right and do this, or you need to do this and show up in this way. And I feel like a lot of the conversations I've been having with my brothers and non-binary folks alike has been more about, okay, what do you need from me in this space right now, and how can I show up for you? Like empathy, you know, but like in order to get to that place, like therapy, like there's a lot of unpacking that we haven't had the opportunity to do also too, because when you look at a young brother like Amir Locke, who's 22, who's murdered, right? He didn't have the opportunity or the chance to like sift through the things that he probably would have gotten to at 39, right, or 45. You know, like brothers are dying so young and so early. Like and a lot of that, the trauma that doesn't get unprocessed, it sits with us.
You know, something in particular there, there's something you've written about, this idea of walking around as a black man always wondering when death is coming for you, right? This idea that, I mean, I don't know how much you all think about it, but do you think about, I don't know who else has to do this, think about how you're going to die, what age you're going to die.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Why would it, you're 23 years old. Why in God's name would you be thinking about that? Why am I sitting at 44 years old for years of my life? Like, is this how I'm going to go out?
Yeah. I guess two things. I had that experience as a black man and also as a femme-presenting black person. I think there's two different ways. It's like, okay, I could be killed by this like external force, may it be like police and whatever, but then also there is like that internal fear as well of being in black spaces and being a femme person and being like, oh, there can be violence inflicted on me in this space as well. And I think to deal with that, there's also privilege that I've been able to radically accept it, which is really a weird like phrase, but I think that's like privilege of like being in the spaces that I'm in. But for me, that's where I'm at.
But that's constant stress and trauma. Who has to walk? We need a collective group black male therapy in this country. Yeah. Like it's hard to get anybody to understand that constant stress to walk through. And we all got these stories, but I've done this before in the pandemic, walking through Times Square when it was shut down, nobody's supposed to be out. And I see two cops in the distance, 20, 30, 40 feet away. And I see them and automatically I hold up my suit bag and start pointing and say, I'm going to work. Why? That's an automatic. I didn't stop and think. I see a cop. He sees me. Let me make sure like that is a trauma. How are we dealing with that trauma if folks outside that are giving us that trauma and stress don't understand or respect it?
TJ, I am always the glass is half full. And that is a subject matter where I am always a glass is half empty. Okay. I don't think we're ever going to have to deal with that. We all have our stories. That comes up to me when I'm around white women in private spaces. If I'm like alone on a street, I see a white woman ahead of me, I actually get nervous because I'm like, at any minute, when is she gonna cry foul? When will the tears come? When I enter my apartment buildings at night, I'm always cognizant if I'm gonna go into this elevator or if I'm gonna go into this corridor or this hallway at 2 a.m. with a white woman, how is that going to impact my safety in my life? Why is that? Because we have so much historical context and data and murders of black men falsely accused, falsely charged, hung, dragged by pickup trucks at the mere mention of a white woman crying foul. That is something I cannot unlock out of my head. That is what gives me actually more fear than the police itself.
It's like well, TJ, when you're talking about the bag, I remember I used to live in the Upper East Side, and right before I would hit 79th and First, I would pull my keys out just because I wanted people to know that I lived here.
Yeah.
Like, I needed people to know, like, hey, I'm not dropping off something at the bodega. I'm not the mail guy. I actually live in this building, so please don't. And like, it becomes part of our routine. So like, to the point that if you're not examining the trauma, you just sit with it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a thing that we haven't yet unpacked, because I think, and TJ, I think you bring such an important point. It's become so part of almost like the way we show up in the world that we take it as a thing that just is, right? So if it just is, you're not inspecting it from a bird's eye lens of like, oh, do I need to unpack it?
Yeah.
You know?
I also wonder, like, do we just sit with it or do we pass it on?
Ooh, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Because I feel like so often, even talking about like black fatherhood, I feel like I've inherited some of my father's trauma, most definitely. My dad's a great person, but I definitely had to carry that. And I think that is one thing, like we talk about like black manhood and blackness in general, one thing we have to figure out is how we can dissolve this trauma and not push it onto other people. Especially, like, for example, if we're talking about black men, like, who are their therapists? Black women.
Joseph, if I can add to that just a little bit, and I'm going to come from where you came from a little bit earlier, because I love how you always come from this duality kind of perspective, and how you said to separate, which was beautifully said, masculinity from manhood. I think when we talk about trauma with that, I think we have to separate intergenerational trauma of mental that we bring onto ourselves versus external forces that we just can't control. Right? Because there's some things that we just can't control, how a person will feel and cry foul in the elevator at 2 a.m. Like, we just can't. No matter how many keys I pull out, no matter how much I even welcome them into my apartment to show what it looks like, no matter how much I tell them how much I pay, no matter how much I tell them what my salary is, like, I just can't control those factors. So I think there are some things that are inherently passed down, and I think sometimes this is just part of the as is and as it will be to what we were discussing.
But the as is, you said it, and I want to stop you when you said it. You said we have to find a way to get out of this pattern. What is that way? Is it just time? Do we need to just, maybe it takes a couple generations. Maybe it takes that kind of time, but in the meantime, what?
I think, just to go back to the thing of talking about the duality there, I think even with the external forces of, like, this could happen walking down the street with this white woman, there still has to be a way to, I guess, transfer that energy, because I don't even know if it's generational trauma. Like, I even find myself where when I'm with my loved ones, okay, something like traumatic happens on the street, or like I've like been around a microaggression. Like, how do I navigate that like traumatic energy and not make it affect my like personal life?
You
know, and I guess like therapy, but that still is like privilege. I don't know.
But I think it goes back, and like, it's when you talk about finding like the village, right? Like on social media and community, it's like you said something earlier that made me think about this too, and it kind of almost going back to what you talked about earlier, TJ, as far as like external, internal. I think the internal community is the biggest part. Like, for me, to be quite and completely honest, I could care less about the white gays or like what the white community is going to do, because they don't care. My job is to protect my people in that way. Now, I can also hold two things to be true at that same time. Like, I can respect and love a white community and hold space for conversation while recognizing my priority is this. So how can I nurture this? And part of that is therapy is such a privilege, but like, what are my therapeutic models, right? So like, is it me, Justice, Mike, and TJ having a good old conversation in a bar or on a panel? Is it me connecting with my brother and just asking and checking in with him and asking him like, how was your heart today? You know, like, how are we giving Black men the space and freedom to just say, this is what I'm going through, and not only sit with that, but then also let's maybe unpack it in a way that's going to make you feel safe, so you don't carry that with you onto the next place or community you engage with.
If I can lean into that just a little bit, and to what both of you are saying is brilliant, because even myself, right? Like, I'm into therapy, I do tons of self-care, aromatherapy, I do cigar walks with my homies in Brooklyn. I travel, I vacation with white people, right? Like, I'm around, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't, and this statement, this
panel.
I was looking through
I know, right? Plot twist.
How did you
plot twist.
security?
Yeah, this isn't being anti-white, right? This is just talking about your lived experiences, right? But all those things that I'm doing, right? And I think we need to, and that's what we were talking about earlier, TJ, that you brought up so brilliantly, like, to do these things to make sure that we do get through the day. But unfortunately for me, doing all those things, I can't help but get the microaggressions that I get on a constant, consistent basis. And you constantly have to ask yourself, is this happening because I'm Black, right? Like, it happens to me on a daily basis. When I have a microaggression, I have to think about it. But I guess thank God for therapy, the cigars, the aromatherapy, the vacations, and the whole nine. Like, I don't carry it with me throughout the entire day. But it does disrupt your day for a moment. And I think that is what you were talking about in your question, is that there still is a disruption in your day. At least for me, I'm human.
But I think, Mike, but part of that, real quick, TJ, I think part of that is like, the trauma isn't going to go anywhere. Like, even when, like, we've been through therapy, we know this process. Like, the trauma doesn't just dissipate. Like, oh, I'm done. Like, because there's always going to be this constant threat of unfortunate violence, whether it's emotional, physical. But I think part of the work for us gets to be, and what I've learned through and through, is like, we just want to lessen the effect of the trigger, right? So like, the microaggression is going to show itself. It's always going to, it's like, did you put the change on the counter instead of putting it in my hand because you don't like me? Because you mad at Will Smith? Like, don't come at me. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe it's not that. My job isn't to sit down and try to unpack the microaggression. My job is to like create space here to be able to say, okay, this thing happened. How can I continue on with my day to ensure that I can continue to put empathy, love, and intention first and foremost?
You know, I didn't have for this panel, I didn't have a section, and we didn't have a of the show that was meant for this and these stories. But to be quite honest with you, it's therapeutic. To share the stories and to hear, well, I know we're all going through and we've had these moments and these issues daily, and somebody on this panel will have another one today. But you know, it felt good to just let it ride. So I appreciate that.
Hi, everyone. George.
Welcome, family. Thank you for everyone who I see joining on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you so much for being here and being part of this conversation. I'm Genevieve. Thank you for joining this special series by Genevieve TV titled Stop the Silence, a conversation about mental health and suicide prevention amongst African Americans. This is the second of a three-part series where we will focus on African American men. Our first show was about our women, and our third show will be about our children, and that is airing this Wednesday. This series is dedicated to and inspired by the lives of Ian Alexander Jr., death by suicide, January 21st. Former mayor of Hyattsville, Maryland, Kevin Ward, death by suicide, January 25th. And Chesley Christ, death by suicide, January 30th. And all who have died by suicide. In addition to the heartbreaking stories of young kids and countless others who we've lost too soon. I am still deeply shaken by the loss of these notable people this year alone. And 22 has just begun, only 52 days ago. First, I'd like to have a 10-second moment of silence for those that we love and those that we've lost. Thank you. It was that too familiar feeling that we all have felt in our Black community when we lose someone, a pioneer, an icon, or a spirit way too soon. It's the same sheer gut punch felt when we lost Michael Jackson, Prince, Whitney, DMX, Nipsey, George Floyd, Kobe, and Gigi Bryant, Breonna Taylor, Chadwick Boseman, and so many others. But see, this gut punch right here, this gut punch hit different. It was a bit harder and a bit deeper. It left us feeling lost for words because these deaths were self-inflicted and meticulously planned by the deceased. Our sister, our brother, or our child had taken their own life. Simultaneously, we as a community thought, what happened? What did we miss? Where did we go wrong? What could we have done to help or prevent this? While collectively we continue to brace ourselves for the next shocking post or hashtag on our social timelines. When we heard of Regina King's son, DJ and artist Ian Alexander Jr. on January 21st, then the mayor of Hyattsville, Maryland, one of my hometowns, Kevin Ward, on January 25th, we all knew that there was a mental health crisis among our African American men. Our brothers far too often suffer in silence. They hold it all in. They wear the mask of being strong and tough and impenetrable. And of course, they are our kings. They must survive being the most violently targeted people in this world by police, by the criminal justice system, and even the media. Where does a black man go to be safe, to show his pain, to cry his tears, to open his heart and bare his soul? Where does he go to be accepted and not rejected, loved and not hated, supported and not put down, or just listened to? Brothers, I see you in the chat. I see you here online. I want you to know this. We are here for you. We love you and we value you. Please watch this.
This is a story for him. I wanted every Black man I know and love to see themselves in this story. And, you know, my son is that.
In a statement to People magazine, Regina confirms the death of her beloved son, saying she and her family are, quote, devastated at the deepest level. The magazine also reports that Ian, who turned 26 on January 19th, died by suicide. He was Regina's only child, named after his father and Regina's ex-husband, music producer Ian Alexander. The mother-son duo frequently stepped out together, and Ian often accompanied his mother as she collected industry accolades. Just weeks ago, the pair lit up CNN's New Year's Eve special as they joined Anderson Cooper and Andy Cohen remotely.
We kind of drink in the spirit of inclusivity too. So, and progress. I love that part right there.
In the wake of the sudden loss, a number of stars are publicly voicing their support for Regina, with Octavia Spencer and Janet Jackson among those remembering Ian on Instagram. Sophia Bush sent love to Regina on Twitter, writing, "Her kindness knows no bounds. And for a heart like hers to have lost her son, I cannot imagine the grief." And shortly after the news broke, Regina's former 227 co-star Jackée Harry simply tweeted, "Nothing but prayers tonight."
A somber night in Hyattsville tonight as the community there remembers Mayor Kevin Ward. The city says he passed away suddenly yesterday from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. News 4's Shamari Stone spoke with some of the people who knew Ward best.
Good evening. The mood is one of sadness here at Hyattsville City Hall. 2 council members and a city employee tells me that Mayor Kevin Ward will be deeply missed. They say he was a trusted leader who advocated for all people. Hyattsville Mayor Kevin Ward passed away on Tuesday. City officials say he died from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. The new interim mayor, Robert Crossland, tells me, quote, "We are heartbroken that we lost a beloved mayor. He was an amazing person who would go out of his way to help anyone." Reggie Bagley agrees. He's Hyattsville's emergency operations manager.
He was a wonderful person for the city.
We interviewed the mayor 6 months ago after a shooting at the Hyattsville Arts District. He heard the gunfire.
It's a flood of emotion, not only because I'm the mayor of the city, but I also live within 200 yards of here.
He often stopped by Vigilante Coffee Company.
We're all terribly sorry to hear about what happened.
And before being elected mayor in 2021, Kevin Ward served on the Hyattsville City Council. Councilmember Edward Haba says he cared about others.
He always liked to ask about my children, how they're doing. He called them my buddies.
Mayor Ward leaves behind his own children, 2 sons, a husband, and a city in mourning. And interim Mayor Crossland sends his deepest condolences to Mayor Ward's family and his kids. He says that this is truly a loss for the city. At Hyattsville City Hall, I'm Shamari Stone, News 4.
Now I'd like to welcome my guest. My first guest is Purvis Taylor III. Purvis is an award-winning celebrity life coach, speaker, and best-selling author of Purvis Principles Volume 1 and 2, Single Man, Married Man, Survival Mode, and his latest release, Heal Forward. As a result of his own trauma, Purvis has dedicated his life to the betterment of one's mental and emotional growth. Thank you for being here, Purvis.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And our next guest, Tara Nelson. She is a licensed master social worker in New York City with over 16 years of experience. Her expertise is in severe mental health disorder, in particular amongst men and women of color. She specializes in providing psychotherapy to individuals with severe mental health disorders, marital issues, and various psychosocial stressors. Thank you for being here, Tara.
Thank you for having me.
And our next guest is Lisa Daughtry. She's a writer, speaker, and mental health advocate working with No More Martyrs and her own nonprofit. No More Martyrs is a mental health awareness campaign committed to building a community of support in Black women with mental health concerns. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here for this critical conversation. Before we get started, let's state some facts about suicide and also facts about the African American community in particular. Now, I like to define certain language in dealing with suicide because people don't necessarily know the nuances of the language. And Lisa was kind enough to express to me how important language is. So to define suicide, it's defined as death caused by self-directed injurious behavior with intent to die or as a result of the behavior. A suicide attempt is a non-fatal self-directed, potentially injurious behavior with intent to die as a result of the behavior. A suicide attempt might not result in injury. And suicidal ideation refers to thinking about, considering, and planning suicide. Now, per the CDC, at the end of 2021, after 2 decades of rising suicide rates in the US, the number of deaths by suicide declined in 2020 for the second year in a row, but not for all demographics. Black, Latino, and Native American continue to be at the top of the list, increasing yearly, especially since the pandemic. We've seen how the pandemic has affected society in every industry. Healthcare workers are burnt out. Teachers are polarized. Small business owners are failing. Drug abuse is rising. Violence is rising. Politics have reignited racial fires, and Black people are still singing, "We shall overcome," and shouting, "No justice, no peace," as microaggressions and racial fragility cause greater confusion and desperation. And this is all in the past 2 to 3 years. Statistically, suicide is declining for most ethnic groups, while it rises in disproportionate rates for African American men, women, and children. This is not another hashtag. This is a last chance to save another life. So, to all of my guests, how prevalent is depression and suicide in the Black community, in particular with Black men? Tara?
Yes. So it's very prevalent, right? So I just want to read some stats that I have from the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities. So among men 18 to 44 who had daily feelings of anxiety or depression, non-Hispanic Black and Hispanic men, 26.4%, were less likely than non-Hispanic white men, that's 45.4%, to have used mental health treatment, right? And suicide is the third largest cause of death for African American men ages 15 to 24. African American men ages 20 to 24 have the highest suicide rate among African Americans of all ages, male and female. Male and female, let that sink in. Okay. Major depressive disorder increased from 9% to 10.3% in the Black and African American youth aged 12 through 17 in the last couple of years. Suicide thoughts, plans, and attempts are also rising among Black and African American young adults. And this is more so since the pandemic, as we've seen with a lot of the high profile suicide attempts and the ones we don't even see that's celebrated or highlighted rather on the news outlets.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to add, and that those percentages don't even, that doesn't represent the whole collective.
Not at all.
And I promise you it's higher. I promise you it's higher. It's definitely prevalent and pervasive within Black men. I've been working with Black men for over 10 years. I don't know why I needed to add that to my bio at the top, but I have a master's in clinical psychology. So I want to make sure that I add that, state that. But yes, I've been working with Black men, young men of color, actually for over 10 years, and I've seen it progressively gotten worse over the years. I've never in my life experienced so many young men who've had suicide attempts, and it's increased as the years progress. And it was bad before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic, because it put us in an isolated space, and many people don't know how to deal with themselves when they're not busy and they don't have all these distractions, all these things happening. So it just exacerbated what was already there.
Absolutely.
Waiting for me. I have to agree with both of the guest panelists. And unfortunately, I think still it is like a taboo for Black men to discuss as far as, or, be open about their mental health. So I myself been a mental health advocate for 10 years. So I'm not licensed, but I'm an advocate. I got involved in mental health because I lost my son, who was 18, Memorial Weekend. And so from there, I didn't even take time off to grieve. I grieved through the process as far as trying to help young people. But those statistics are very true. I mean, for men, young men and men being this, it being the third, rated third as far as for death. I think 1 and 2 is murder and drugs, but still to be number 3, you know.
And it's increasing.
Mhm.
And it's increasing. And I wanted to add, I'm sure you're going to get there, Tara, but even the babies are even considered in the suicide
Yeah,
rates.
I was
Yeah.
reading something the other day because I work at a hospital in the Bronx, and a colleague, we were just talking 5, 6,
Yeah,
7
five,
years,
five,
Yeah,
six, 7 years
five,
old.
7
five,
years old,
five.
and
Yes.
that comes into part with this gaming. The
Mm-hmm.
gaming, being in front of the video games all day long, that turns into a mental illness. In fact, that's part of the DSM-5,
Yeah,
this
it is.
gaming that we're doing, that these kids are doing. You have to be very careful with that. People have to pay attention to when their children are constantly in front of these video games. I have a patient, an adult, he games to the point that he's suicidal when he can't even, when his electricity is turned off. He's selling things
Yeah.
so he can have electricity to game.
But also too, that even yields to a place of connection, right? How we long
Right.
for connection. Right. And I think for a lot of Black men, and I don't want to be blanketed, make it blanketed statements, but when I work, I work with everyone, and working with women, I found that women tend to be more communal and
Right.
more apt to talk about their issues, right? Not saying that women don't experience suicide ideation or commit suicide or depression or anxiety. It's actually really high, right? But women are more prone to at least get into a community space around it,
Right.
whereas men, we don't. And so even in that that video that we saw at the beginning about the barbershop, right? Is it really, really that authentic, right? I think it's more veneer. I think because of what we're really, really experiencing, really, really battling with as men, we don't even have the language to even begin to even describe what it is that we're experiencing.
But can I say this? It's because way back, that saying "men don't cry," um, you know, it's that we basically programmed Black men, and then even go back to slavery. I mean, where they were silenced, they were demeaned. I mean, castrated, to the point where that's generational trauma that people, I mean, Black men deal with, and so, you know, it's just now, working, and I did a couple of workshops with working with brothers, having men's only workshops where they feel comfortable to have open conversation, open dialogue with each other. And I love it when I hear Black men come out and say, "Hey, yeah, we have a roll call in the morning,"
Oh, yes.
where brothers are just checking in with each other, and if someone is going through something, they can talk about it. I'm very proud of the brothers that are out there now that are saying, "Hey, you know what? It's okay that I'm not doing okay, but I want that conversation to keep open. Let's stop shaming people and being judgmental."
Well, that's
Learn.
I think that. Oh, I'm sorry, Tara. Go ahead. I'm
No,
sorry.
Oh, no,
and
I wasn't.
just
Oh,
briefly,
yeah,
remember I was taking a taxi to work one day, and this was a couple of years, this is about almost 10 years ago, and a taxi driver just started talking about a friend, how he was he and the thing was he didn't know who he had in the car, and he was like, he's like, the brother was tripping, talking about he was suicidal, and I was like, oh man. I was like, so before he dropped me off, and I said, "Can I tell you this?" I said, "I just lost my son a couple of months ago," and I said, "You shaming your brother, not your brother, but he's like, a friend." I said, "You shaming him to not talk about it, or shaming him to say man up." I said, that basically that doesn't make it better. It makes it worse, because now he's suppressing all of those emotions, all what he wants to try to vent or talk about. He can't trust anybody because he feels somebody's going to be judgmental about it.
Yeah. And I have a program here in New York City. It's called Alchemic Solutions. It teaches young men of color how to develop and cultivate emotional intelligence. And the first tenets of emotional intelligence are self-awareness and self-management. And a lot of people aren't self-aware. A lot of people don't even know that they are experiencing depression. They know something's not right, but they technically don't have language for it. And particularly with men, I help men to develop an emotional lexicon because everything ain't I feel a ways. Everything is not I'm mad tight or whatever language is used, right? There's so many emotions that color and contextualize our experiences, right? You don't handle rage the way you handle I'm a little perturbed, right? You know what I mean? Like language matters, as you said, Lisa. Language is everything, especially when it comes to us healing as people and as Black men. And even in therapy, therapy is an exchange of words, right? So your healing is always in your words. And so I teach men to use as many words as possible to describe where you are, because that is so essential and it's going to be so vital for your journey in the journey towards healing and flourishing, which is what which is the work that I do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put this question out. How much do the pressures from life versus clinical mental illness play in the overall adoption of suicide as a solution?
Ooh, I think that's so I spoke to a group of fathers during the pandemic, added the pandemic, and many of them were unemployed. And we're having this session and I said to them, I was like, but you get to be a father. And they looked at me like I was crazy. Because in their mind, as men, we have been actualized to be performative. So what we provide makes us a man.
Right.
But I told them, I said, but you get to be a father, so you get to provide in that way. Because what if everything is taken away, like the pandemic taught us, right? The pandemic took a lot of things away from a lot of people. So then who are you? And so that definitely played a part, because I think the culture at hand telling us what we're supposed to be as men, and providing is a beautiful thing. I'm not trying to minimize it. It's a beautiful thing, but it's low-hanging fruit. There's so many more layers to who we are as men.
Right.
And so those brothers, when they left that conversation, they were like, yo, you get to be a father. That is awesome. And you may not be able to provide monetarily the way you used to, but you can provide emotionally, you can provide spiritually. There's so much more to us. And so I definitely think that plays a part in actual suicide ideation and actual suicide attempts, because the culture at hand is telling us you are only meant to be actualized as a provider. If you don't make six figures, if you don't have this, if you don't have this, you don't have that, you're not anything. And it's even more exacerbated by social media. We see highlight reels every day on social media. People on jets, people standing in front of, you know what I mean? And so that triggers social media depression. That triggers a thing. It's a trickle down effect. So forgive my passion, but it definitely plays a part and can lead to suicide attempts.
So, sorry guys, with me jumping off and on. So we're talking about the media and then those outside factors kind of contributing to these suicidal ideations and the comparison and everything else, and always in, like what you said, having a blessing of fatherhood, but then feeling the pressure of that, right? And I was actually speaking to a man earlier yesterday, and he was saying how there's a whole group of men who are those men who have been highly educated, highly experienced, have climbed the social ladder, have actually gotten those corporate C-level jobs. And then they get to a point where they're not even accepted there, in that arena. And then it's kind of like, well, what do I do? I've kind of graduated out of this level, and then I'm here and I'm not accepted here. So where does somebody go where they've kind of what we were saying is had this form of what you would call success, right? And then still are dealing with these kind of like these crowns that we're constantly, this weight we're putting on them. What do they do? How do they go? Where do they go with the weight that they have? Well, and I saw a purpose when in the clip we were showing in the beginning, one of the gentlemen said, who are our therapists? Black women. And I saw you shake your head like, no. So talk to me about that.
Well, no, listen, I'm saying, like, there are a bunch of brothers who are therapists. There are a bunch of brothers who do the work that I do. And we need everyone. We need Black women. We need everyone. This is all a collective effort. To heal women, it's going to take men. To heal men, it's going to take women, right? So I'm definitely not stating that. But I actually just did a workshop for pastors around suicide prevention, right? Just this weekend. And one of the things I think is so important is like, because therapists right now, traditional therapists are spent because of the pandemic, right? It's hard to book a session with a therapist now, a really good one, right? At least the good ones. They booked out 6 months ahead, right?
Yeah.
So an alternative is the lived experience. Mike Muse, who's a friend of mine who's in the clip, Mike Muse talked about the lived experience. Lived experiences groups have been proven to be just as successful as traditional one-on-one therapy, right? So if that's an alternative, we can create spaces. Obviously, I would have a counselor, I would have someone who's licensed to kind of run it, but to kind of oversee it. But definitely you can create a lived experience group. Those things have been so successful. So like there are ways for you to heal. And I would say to that brother, truthfully, you are so much more than a C level, whatever that is, right? Like I would say that brother, heal those broken spaces within you, because that will never satisfy you.
So the sharing and the bond of brotherhood, you're saying, is just as important, if not as critical as therapy. Because it's like, listen, I see you, I feel you, I've been there. And like what we said, ladies, Tara and Lisa, I was explaining in the last one, I had a sister circle I used to do at my house. And I thought it would be about an hour long. That thing would go on for 8 hours just because of the shared experience.
I held prior to the pandemic, I did a lot of different type of workshops, but then I focused on men only workshops. And I think we did maybe about 2 or 3 prior to the pandemic. And when, like you said, what the time frame that I had it designated, they were overflowing. And I made sure it was just for men's only. I mean, to cover everything for them. And when I used to come back just to check on them, it's like literally, it was like they needed more time. And they were really having, a brotherhood, a rite of passage, just spending time with one another and talking about, just being open about stuff, it was amazing.
So Tara, what are you finding that are some of those key issues and problems that people are coming to your office with? Like, like he mentioned, like fatherhood. I know fatherhood is a definite stressor, but what are some of those things that are like really are hitting our brothers right now?
Believe relationships. That's a big one. Relationships and depression, major. So what I find is that I'm having more Black men come into therapy sessions, which is amazing, right? Amazing. And when they meet me, they're like, wow, you're a Black woman. I have a Black woman therapist. And I'm just like, yeah. So it's just knowing that, the culture plays a part. So that's a major thing. Like, why do Black men sometimes not seek therapy? Well, they want someone to look like them, and they may prefer a Black man. There's not a lot of Black men therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. There's not a lot of us, right? So depression, marital issues, homelessness, job insecurities, major the pandemic, and homelessness. Right now is depression, which is number one. I haven't had anything so much as relationships. That was prior to the pandemic, but it's mostly depression, major depressive disorder, all of that because of the pandemic. George Floyd was a major during my sessions, and just talking about that. And like I mentioned when we did the talk about women, I have an issue with the word PTSD because I feel like with Black men, or with just us period as Black people, is racial trauma. When we talked about the policing in our communities, and how when TJ Holmes spoke about, hey, here's my suit bag, I'm just going to work. Like, it shouldn't have to be like that. That's trauma. That's racial trauma. That has nothing to do
and that
with,
creates anxiety. Right? Which trickles into something else, which turns into
how do you provide therapy to that? Because that's going to happen probably as soon as you leave my session. Some officer, white cop or whatever, is going to stop you after you had sessions with me. How is my session going to make you feel safe? It's not, because it's racial trauma.
And to add on to that, it makes the grief more complicated.
Right.
Right. And so like people don't recognize with the pandemic for Black people, it was so complicated for us. It was so complex for us because we're dealing with George Floyd, we're dealing with this, we're dealing with just being Black, and then we got to deal with being a human, then we got to deal with, oh, now my life ain't what it used to be. So it was so complex for us as Americans, right? As Black people. So to her point, she's absolutely right. And like, how do you deal with that? Because most people don't have the bandwidth to separate. We just take it all together.
Yeah. We wear it. And that we get this stigma of being like, angry Black people are very aggressive. And no, but we're constantly wearing the trauma and the aggression that is forced upon us. Oh, it's almost like we're protecting ourselves, right? It's almost like we're keeping a distance and we're pushing people away just to protect ourselves.
And that's detrimental to our healing.
Yes.
Right. Because you can only heal when you're in your most authentic space.
Absolutely.
So the fact that we're putting on this veneer and we have to go on with all these layers, how do we ever get to who we really are? You see what I'm saying? So that's the challenge.
Yeah. I mean, and then we spoke about this as well, is that it's also generational, right? So when you look at it, it's trauma from the past, and we don't want to just talk about just slavery. No, it is consistent trauma throughout the generations of our lives, and how we've seen our communities treated, and how just the healthcare system and the policies and just schooling, just like why are our children kind of like in this environment, and they don't even get the chance. They don't even get the chance sometimes because the system has been set up to disproportionately keep us at a level where we cannot, even when we try, better ourselves. And it's this pressure. I was actually listening to something with this gentleman, and he was talking about how just the constant pressure of Black people in particular, but a Black man too, of being like, you have to be better. You can do the same job and everything, but you have to be better to get equal. Just that pressure alone in your head, you have to be better to get equal.
Exactly.
And it's just, it's a constant struggle. And I mean, we as women, we want to lean on our brothers, right? We want to be like, you're the king, you lead our household. If you are in a Christian household, you believe that the man is to lead the household, right? And so you want to lean to him. But we as Black women have our own stressors as well. You know what I mean? And then we feel sometimes, and I will even speak for myself, is that I don't feel like I want to burden my Black man with some of my trauma and stuff, because he's already dealing with it in the corporate office. He's already dealing with it walking out the door. He's already dealing with it to protect us.
And he's dealing with it just being a human being.
Amen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Amen.
So like, it becomes tiered,
Yeah.
That's the challenge. And it's the same thing for Black women. You know what I mean? So it's tiered. We're both having similar struggles, right? It just manifests differently.
Yes. And so speaking of that, how do we open up to each other? Black men and Black women. I mean, if we're having similar situations.
Well, I think when the and Terry, you can back me up on this. I think because I do a lot of coaching with marital coaching, and one of the things I think one of the biggest challenges is for like wives or women, they want an immediate answer from their husband, and not recognizing that it takes us maybe 2 weeks to even process
to even
open up,
to even open up, right? And so that becomes that's the challenge, right? And so you have to so in order to be that space for him, you have to say, hey, can we talk about this? How is next Thursday? Seriously, right? How can we talk about certain things? How's next Thursday? Or ask open-ended questions, not direct. yes or no questions, asking open-ended
Yeah,
questions. Because it
open-ended.
causes us
That's
to use
good.
more language. Remember, our
Mhm.
healing is in our words, right? So just
Mhm.
asking open-ended questions, and also too, letting go of what you think a man is supposed to be, and recognize
Mm.
this is a human being talking to you right now.
Mm.
Can I add one thing in which I had to learn is how to talk to your man.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
We
And listen,
can't talk to your man like he's a child. He's not a child.
Right. And
You have to talk to him. And it's and some people not gonna understand this, but I had to learn how to talk to my man. I couldn't, just like you said, open end questions, but at the same time talk to him so that he doesn't feel like, okay, I got my back against the wall.
yeah,
Okay, here she go,
right,
and
embracing,
right,
yeah,
and then he shuts down.
yes,
Talk to him. You have to learn how to talk to him.
and listen attentively.
Yes,
Listen.
and listen.
Men
And
are
stop.
so. I had to learn that.
And stop.
Men are just. I think they just are. Whatever they say it is, that's what it is. I think
Right,
that
exactly.
we
Stop
add.
making your own interpretations.
yeah.
And don't emasculate him, right?
Right.
Don't
Right.
when he then opens up to you and he shows you his vulnerable side, or he cries and he needs you to now, don't emasculate him.
Because that window of vulnerability
Right.
will never be opened again.
Right.
If it's compromised, it will never. That's how fragile we can be as men. And I think a lot of women don't recognize that.
Right.
You know, and what you said, Tara, how you listen, people can tell if you're listening to them judgmentally or if you're listening to them empathetically. People can tell how you're listening to them. Like that's how powerful listening is.
Listening is
So we
very
just have to be mindful
powerful.
of all of it.
And my field is it's attentive listening. Like I'm paying very close attention to body language, verbal, nonverbal cues. I'm listening. And I think as Black women, we need to do that. There's a lot of talking and there's not enough listening attentively to what your man is saying to you. Hear him and look at his actions. You can tell, like, we have to really put aside egos and pride and all of that when it comes to these relationships. And whether your spiritual belief system plays a part, if you're a believer in Christ, put him first and foremost in the center, behind and in front of your relationships. If that's not, your thing, then figure some other things out. But most importantly, attentive listening, communication, and hear him, see him, because he's going through hell out there. He's going through purified hell every single day.
And Tara, to piggyback on what you said, now, like Kevin Ward, right? Mayor of Hyattsville, Maryland, 2 beautiful children, community loves him, married, everything. If you see some changes in your husband or in your mate or your brother or your father or your best friend, how do you approach a man? See, now with sister, I'd be like, sister, girl, come here. I love you, girl. We can sit down and get in our pajamas and kind of like, really get into it and cry together. But with a man who's already has this kind of shroud of pride and you do not want to emasculate him, how do you approach him? How do you say, I'm noticing, like, I've been listening, babe. I've been listening, honey. And I'm noticing your body language. I'm noticing you're withdrawing. Can we talk? How do you approach that? And Purvis, I'd love to hear from you too, as a man.
Well, I think what you like, how you approached it, how you just approached it, that helps. Like, again, like how you been feeling? I'm here for you. Like, and not belaboring it, right? Because we don't want that to turn into perceived nagging, even though it's concern and love, right? But how we interpret it could be nagging. But just saying, is everything okay? I'm here for you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here.
Yeah.
And kind of like this. And just let
let those 2 weeks or 2 days go by. So let him come back.
Let him come back. And then just the touches, right? Just even something that's a touch. Like, I see you type of thing. Like, I love you. You know what I mean? Like, just something as subtle as that. And if you really think it's something serious, then that's when we got to call the suicide prevention hotline. That's what we got to do. We got to do. Somebody got to be 5150. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's, like, we get to that point. But up until that point, don't make it a bigger issue than what it needs to be.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's pressures of life, being a
Yes.
Black man.
Yes.
And then there's clinical mental illness. Those are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
They can affect each other, right?
Yes.
But those are two different things. So with that, how does one play into the other in adopting, going further in the thought process of suicide may be the solution for me?
Well, I'm gonna let Tara, because this is her lane, but I'll just say this briefly. You know, one of the things that's so beautiful about being a human being is that we have more say so than we realize, right? And so we're responsible for our mental health. And so we're responsible for how we show up. So we have to be accountable for our mental health, our mental illnesses, whatever they may be. I think a lot of times people just don't know how to cope in the proper way or have the proper tools to deal with it. And so suicide is probably the natural choice, right? And I think people aren't educated. People aren't invested in coping. People aren't invested in learning how to function, right? We're all coping. Everybody on this earth is coping. We all have pain. We all have trauma. Everybody on this earth is coping, right? Lisa's coping, helping people by, she lost her son, and still within that grieving process, she's still coping, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's more so about learning how to cope in a healthy way. And I think, people don't realize suicide, people just want the pain to end. I don't think they want to leave here. They just want that pain to end. So I think it's more so, I think they play hand in hand, but I think it's more so really about investing in being educated and really, really seeing a person like Tara who can help give you tools to help you function. And if medicine is needed, take the medicine. There's no shame in that. It doesn't mean that you're not dope. It doesn't mean that you're not amazing. It doesn't mean that you don't love the Lord. It don't mean none of those things. It just means that you needed some assistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does play hand in hand, and having a severe mental illness also is a risk factor, which leads to suicide ideation, suicide attempts. So just having family members check in, knowing your mental health, having a provider there, going to therapy, taking your medication, all of those things to help address, so it don't lead to suicide ideations or attempts. So life stress, the pandemic, we've seen so many suicide attempts, depression, loss of job, life, isolation, all of this, putting you in a place where you're at home alone, thinking. You're not busy. You're thinking about, I'm a failure. I'm not where I need to be. I'm 30 plus. A lot of my patients, I'm 34. I didn't go to college. I lost my job. I don't believe in the vaccine. I lost my job. All of these things leads to, well, why should I be on earth anymore?
It's the rumination, right? You start to ruminate
the constant thinking. Yeah. Constantly. Which means I might as well give up. I might as well just give up, go to this bridge and jump.
Yeah.
So to piggyback on what both of you were saying about, like, there's these pressures that come, and then it's the next step is kind of like, in some people's mind is, well, I might as well not be here. When there's all of these resources, all of these different avenues, all of the, like you said, medication, therapy, religion, mental, spirituality, friendship, the circles, all of that, how do we just jump from one to the other? And what it brings me to think about is during this quarantine, when this quarantine first started happening, everybody was kind of isolated. I mean, the streets of New York were blank. I had never seen anything like that in my life. It was like apocalypse. It was crazy. But what was so interesting is that everybody started to feel the same way. That first couple of weeks was like, oh, this is cool, I'm home. But then, especially if you were single, or it was kind of you in your small New York apartment or in LA or whatever, you're kind of like, well, now what do I do? And especially for celebrities who get all this adornment from their fans, and all they go on the road and they have their squad and their people that are always yesing them, and they get in all of this love and praise every night after night. They were like, what am I doing? So you can have the choice of, like, okay, I'm going to go totally and say, Why am I here? Or, for an example, I think a beautiful way that it was turned, and I use him as an example because I think during the quarantine, this is an example of a man, a Black man, who was in a place of, I don't know what's next for me in my life, and I'm alone, and turn that into a whole movement. D Nice.
I knew you was gonna say Derek. I knew you was gonna say Derek.
I mean, how could you not? How could you
Derek?
not?
Derek flipped that whole thing around.
Flipped it. Talk about a pivot in career and a pivot in life. He was alone in his apartment in LA. He was booked before the pandemic. He was booked back to back to back, always at a party, always with a celebrity. All of a sudden, he was in isolation. He didn't know what to do. He put his turntables on his kitchen counter. He turned Instagram on, and by the third day, he had over 1 million people in there. And we are now about to celebrate the second year in March of Club Quarantine. He has now gotten awards and accolades. He just performed at NBA All-Star. He's, everywhere. This is an example of someone who was in a position that a lot of us were in, found something that he loved. He didn't front, authentic, right, Purvis? He was in his authentic self. And he did something that he loved, music. And he hit his camera. And from that, I will be honest with you, I believe he saved lives with Club Quarantine.
Oh, yes, he did.
Of course.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. He became an agent of change and spreading love and spreading good vibes with that music. And I'm telling you, when people were in their darkest hour and they turned on Club Quarantine, they felt a community.
Joy.
They felt a community.
Joy.
I know I did.
Yes. I felt joy.
6 8 listen, all night.
Listen, we've all been in there together. And so, so there's the depressive who's like, I'm very depressed and I'm sad and I'm low, and is showing all the signs. But then you have some high functioning depressives like Chesley Christ, right? Who was always on, who was bubbly, who was a ray of sunshine. But there was obviously something going on that we didn't know. Where do you see those indicators? How do you determine, where somebody is at? And Lisa, with you and advocacy, and you were just saying how you held a conference where the brothers were just wanted to stay more. I'd love for all of you to speak on that. That's two totally different faces.
And I'll say this, within Black men and Black boys, it's proven that depression looks different in Black men and Black boys. It's not the same typical attributes that you see in other demographics. I think, honestly, that's where your discernment comes in. You just notice, I think we don't teach that enough, is to be tapped into your discernment, into your intuition, which is the sixth sense, right? Your spirit can know certain things. It's like, because, high functioning depression, it's hard to see if this person is truly depressed. And it's a very thin line. I think you just have to know what you know. It's funny, I'll be like, such and such is depressed. And they be like, no, they're not. And then next thing you know, they're coming out. They were like, how do you know? I said, I just felt it. It's just something about the eyes.
Yeah.
I can't explain it, but it's but we have to be in tune with our intuition. Like mothers, y'all know when something's wrong with y'all.
Yeah.
Y'all, it could be a room full of babies, and it's your baby crying. Right?
Absolutely.
We all have it, but we just don't tap into it enough. And I think we kind of shame it. But you have to be in tune with that to be able to discern that. Unless this person is telling you that they're depressed or they're going through whatever they're going through. But I know for me, I was depressed and I was high achieving. Ivy League, on TV, doing this, talking about my books, doing all that stuff like that, and depressed, and no one knew.
So what did you do? What was your next step?
I went to my therapist. I don't play those games. I went to Jesus, and I went to Jesus, and I went to my therapist, and I went to lifeline. I have my lifeline, my community.
Yeah.
Most people, we're all trying to figure it out. And it's not shade to anyone, but we trying to figure out our lives. So we can't really be as perceptive as we want to be at times with our friends or our community. But if we take the time to be intentional and showing up and being that person for our friends, I think that helps a great deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Pay attention to the body language. There's one friend. There's always going to be one that notice. When I'm with my friends, anyone, my sorority sister, I'm watching. They know I watch. Like I'm looking at behaviors.
Same.
I see souls. I'm an empath too. I'm watching all type of things.
That's
right. I can tell. I can tell, and my gut never lies. I can tell when something's wrong. And I do this, like I can tell. I know, like you can be high functioning, or as we call it, persistent depressive disorder, which is high functioning. You know, that's 2 years. You have this depressed mood, but you're functioning. You're laughing, you're smiling, you're doing all these things, but in the background, you're planning, you're plotting your death.
Yes.
From the time, like we mentioned with women, from the time to what you wore, your last meal, last phone call, note if you even leave a note. Everything is planned to a T perfectly, you know?
And like you said, Tara, the last time is that, someone may actually even be more happy and more excited.
They have the energy. They have the energy to do it now. So they're highly excited and anticipating their death because they have the energy. They have the strength to do it now.
It's like it's analogous to like some cancer patients before like the actual it takes you out. They have that surge of energy and they feel like themselves again, and then it's like the decline. It's the same thing.
Wow. So once a person has begun, and kind of fixated that like suicide is my way out, but they are still here with us, and we're noticing these signs. We, as people who love on people or empaths, we want to do something. Is it more than calling saying checking on you and calling a suicide prevention hotline? Is there something more like that we can do that's drastic that says, look, I did everything I could do, other than just calling and checking on your strong friends? Because even I did that over the weekend. I started checking on my strong friends. I was like, listen, boom, 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 boom. But then you still hear like a little something and you're like, is there anything else I can do? Because I know you can't push. You don't want to push. But is there, other than giving the resources, is there anything that we can do? Because what happens is once that person is gone, you then say, what did I miss? What could I have done more of? I'm sure Regina King and Chesley Chris's mom, they were best friends with their children. And if it's your child, and I mean, Lisa, I couldn't imagine. You have to say, this is my child. There's no one more in tune with my child than me. What more could I have done? And they're left feeling that way. So is there anything else other than just here are these resources for you to then take charge? Because what I find is a lot of people, they don't want to take control of that side of like, I'm going to then call the therapist. It's not even prevalent in our community.
That's so. See, the thing is the fear in our community with health care. When you talk about Tuskegee, which ties in line with the vaccination, why people of color do not believe and trust, even though a Black woman, the scientist, and she's saying all of this about the vaccine, the lack of trust within the community with healthcare providers. I mean, just checking in on them and saying, listen, I'll go with you there. Let's find a person of color. Let's talk about what this looks like.
But be consistent with it. Don't just, you provide them the resource and then you assume, okay, I gave it to them and you go on your way. Be consistent. They need that consistent support from their friends, from their tribe, because you don't, like you said, you don't want after it happens is, okay, what could I have done? I gave them the resources, but then you're like, you know what? I could have took an extra step and just kept checking on them. I could have said, hey, I'll go with you, like you said, Tara, but be consistent. You have to be consistent. I think we have to be good listeners, not just our tuitions, but also be good listeners when we have friends or families that are dealing with mental health or depression. We just can't say, okay, well, I talked to them, they seem okay. I mean, we gotta eyes, ears, listen. I mean, and not be judgmental.
Safe space and creating that safe space for them. That's so important. Non-judgmental, safe space. Let them talk it out because there's a hurt there. It could be something traumatic they went through. Child incest, child abuse, sexual abuse, things that in the culture that it's hidden, not talked about. Like pushed under the rug, and it resurfaced in adulthood. It comes, it manifests. Stuff out of nowhere, a trigger. You watching Law and Order, and something triggers. These, so that's another topic.
I was again doing my research for this topic. There was a mayor of a community. I'm not sure if it was in Detroit or somewhere in the Midwest, and they were saying how, like you said, Purvis, there's a long line to wait to get a therapist, but it's easier to get a gun than a therapist. And they were saying, while you may go ahead and try to put your name on that list and get that appointment 6 weeks later with the therapist, but while you're waiting for that 6 weeks, you're still dealing with the trauma, and it's so much easier to get a gun and shoot yourself. And we know that is a leading cause for Black males and male period to kill themselves is gunshot wound, and so inflicting gunshot wound to yourself. And that's another thing, the resources in the community, right? Why is it taking so long? And I know they have these now, you can call in for a therapist, they have these apps and everything like that. So I think for me, being not a therapist and everything, is we have to have these resources just as quickly as we can, go do anything.
Well, I think that is absolutely true, but I think we also got to keep in mind that not all therapists are created equal. Number one. Number two, I think one of the biggest challenges with the society we live in today is that we want everything instantaneous, and people don't understand the process. You know what I mean? So like, people don't understand that healing, you're gonna be healing for the rest of your life. Healing is not linear, but it is continual. Right? So you heal, it can be like this. Healing looks like this.
Yes.
But most people don't
heal from something else pops up.
Or even just that thing, like, I lost my father at 24 to a heroin overdose. So it was like this initially, and now it's kind of like this. But if I see something that triggers, it can go. You see what I'm saying? And I think people are just not prepared for process, because we have instantaneous. People are millionaires overnight. People are influencers. People, you know what I mean? Like, just the world we live in. You famous for being, Kanye's bag carrier. You know what I mean? So it's like we're just in a different dispensation of time, right? And so like process and journey are antithetical to the culture that we live in now, the now culture.
It's not going to happen overnight. I totally agree. And that's why I sometimes look at people who be like, oh yeah, I've been to therapy. But then I'm like, looking like, as you said, the red flags. I'm like, what are you still in? I want to ask, are you still in therapy, or what's going on? Because I'm like, it's 10 years. This would be 10 years for me. But I've been to therapy prior to that for other things. For me, I always will keep a therapist with me, because like you said, it's you're gonna have ups and downs. There'll be times, I know, years I just looked at it and I said, okay, things are okay, just little bumps. Then something would trigger me and I'm like, woof. And I'm like, okay, call a therapist. And sometimes it could be conference, face to face, or whatever. But the thing is I know my healing process, my peace, I have to be consistent with having a therapist. It's, I mean, just like you have a primary physician for your checkups, your annual
That's right.
checkups, you have a cardiologist, you have a pediatrician, you have a gynecologist. You need a therapist just like that annually. I mean, quarterly, who knows? But still, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a week. You say, oh, I'm done, I'm cured. No, this is a process.
And also, don't wait till the trauma builds up, right?
Right.
Like, to stay healthy, stay in therapy.
Absolutely.
Right.
But I think the challenge, particularly with Black men, as I said before, is like a lot of Black men just don't have language, don't know how to describe or contextualize their experiences. And one of the things I teach men is like to use your sensory language. So if you can't describe it emotionally, you can describe it using your senses. So if you ask him how he's doing and he says, I feel like I got hit by a Mack truck, right? That's all you need, because you can describe, you can see somebody getting hit by a Mack truck, you can hear it. It appeals to all the senses, right? And so I think that's also the problem. I think with, Lisa, when you're talking about when people say they're going to therapy, people aren't as transparent as they need to be. And I think sometimes they're not transparent because they don't know how to be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we need our brothers. Now, okay, if someone survives a suicide attempt, like you find out your friend, they tried it, they're still here. What now? What now, Tara? Say it again.
Accountability.
Services need to be in place.
Yeah.
They survived it. If they were hospitalized, that hospital is going to link them to services, outpatient, psych therapists, talk therapists, support system, belief system. The tribe has to come together now.
Yeah.
Because they will try again.
Yeah.
They will possibly try again. So that support team has to be formed immediately.
Right. If you're not happy with the therapist you're dealing with, try again.
Another one,
Just don't say, okay, this is not working for me. You need this. This is something, like I said, it's inedible. You need to have this therapy sessions. So try again, find somebody else.
And tell them to give you 2 or 3. I like to give my patients 2 or 3 psychiatrists. And I always ask them, do you prefer a person of color, male, female, just so there's no excuses that they have that resource.
Exactly.
Right? And I tell them it's like a marriage. It has to fit. Like the type of church you want to join, the type of relationship, it has to work. And the therapist is the same thing.
You date. You
right.
That's right.
That's very true. That is very true. That's very. Now, if someone does die by suicide, now where do you begin to pick up the pieces? Now we're the family, we're the friends. What do we do?
From my experience, I think one of my girlfriends who, when it happened, she was very, like I said, she was very consistent as far. I was doing so much, trying to make sure the high school, everybody was fine, the visual, everything. And she was watching me being the super mom, the superwoman. And she was like, I want to introduce you to my therapist. And I heard her, but I'm still going through the process. Okay, I have to do this and do this and do that and whatever. And she, it was at my son's memorial service at the reception. She pulled me again and she said, this is my therapist number. And I was like, I didn't even say nothing. I just sort of like had my mouth dropped, but I was like, I get it, sis. I get it. And I was so glad I did, because it was like, I'll give you an example. I was running, trying to get back into some type of normalcy, during a grievance, and was running with some friends in a park, and we were just talking, and then we started talking about children. And next thing, I had an anxiety attack. And when you have an anxiety attack, you feel like your heart, you can hear your heart in your ears like this. And I'm trying to breathe. And I'm like, I just felt like somebody just took a vacuum, and I was like, okay. And I just stood there for a minute. I was like, okay, can I breathe? Because I could not concentrate. And I said, okay, I'm calling a therapist today to schedule an appointment. When I said no one in my office could see me cry, but when I walk into her office, I had a box of tissue. She had a box of tissue ready for me. That box of tissue was done every session. But it was so therapeutic for me because I didn't cry in front of people, but for her, I poured my heart out. I let everything out. It was the best thing I ever did in my life. And I know people feel like, okay, go to church. I got God and a therapist, honey. But
both and
yes, I cannot imagine myself without a therapist now.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have so many amazing comments. So many people joined Instagram and Facebook. I mean, it's lighting up here. I don't even know how many people, but right now everyone's saying amen. This is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. We needed this conversation. Thank you for these conversations. Marriage counseling is always on the calendar. I have a good friend. They do not play, married 22 years, and they go to marriage counseling every month and do not negotiate.
Awesome. Yes.
Because that's the thing, right? You have to be on the offense when it comes to your mental health.
Right.
You have to be on the offense.
Right. Right. And then another one is saying, I withdraw, that they withdraw when they get upset and they get depressed and they're, going through these things. So this conversation has been so beneficial to so many people. I can't even read all the comments right now, but it's just been a pleasure. I mean, any last words that you guys want to say before I close out? It's just been so therapeutic just talking to you guys and really kind of saying that we care and we're okay where we are, and what we need to do is just be proactive. I love, Lisa, you said consistency. I love that, being consistent. Tara, all the information of the signs and the triggers you gave us, ways to see that body language and to listen, right? And then Purvis just talking about the community and how brothers may not have the language. I mean, these are gems that were dropped. I hope y'all, really heard this. I hope you guys share this with your community, share this with your husbands, your brothers, your fathers. So many people need this. Our Black brothers need this. There are resources. We are a community of Black women. We love y'all. We love y'all. We need you. We need you. We're not going to let this world beat up on you no more, from the criminal justice system, police, to all this other stuff out there. We're not going to let it happen no more, So we are here. We're standing. We're standing in the gap for you, brothers, and we love you.
That's
right. So any other last words from my three guests?
I would just say, therapyforblackmen.org is a great resource for brothers to utilize. And, I just want to say to brothers out there who are a little bit, cautious about seeing a therapist, a therapist's sole purpose is to see you be well. They have no investment other than investing in you winning, right? And so I want you to know, don't be afraid. Know that therapist is on your side. So that's what I want to say.
I was just going to say therapy for Black. I was just going to say that. Just please seek therapy and know that we love you. We support you. I can speak as a Black woman. I love my Black men. I support my Black men. My research is all about Black men, because I know there is a limit on research on Black men. There's 19 studies done on Black men with 19 out of a 5-year span. 19 empirical studies done on Black men dealing with depression. So I began this PhD journey because of Black men, because I'm going to add to the research. I'm doing it.
We need you.
I advocate on social media about this. I stand with Black men. I have so many Black men friends, and I support you guys. You know that. And just please seek the help. You guys know how much I love you. Just please seek the help. We got you.
So I'm going to lead this. Just as when Black men, we're dealing with heart diseases and we're dealing with cancer and diabetes, just as much as the intensity as far as your physical health, your mental health is the same. And just think of suicide as a heart attack of the brain.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love my brothers. I love my Black brothers.
Yes.
Hey.
Listen, you guys are our leaders. We struggle in the Black community for leaders, and we definitely look to our Black men to lead us and to really show us, as Black women, the gifts that we are to you. We want to be a gift to you too, brothers, and we love you.
Right.
So I want to thank my guests so much for being here. You guys are phenomenal, so powerful. Purvis, oh my goodness. I had to have a Black brother on here, okay? And you came through.
Yeah, you did.
Came through.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. And Tara, thank you. We will see
Thank
you
you.
again. And Lisa, we will see you on Wednesday when we talk about Black children and mental health and suicide in the Black community. So to close out, I'm going to say no one will ever know for sure all the reasons that led to that fateful day for Chesley, Ian, and Kevin, or anyone else we've lost due to suicide. But what I do know is I fully intend to use my voice, platform, and network to shine a light on mental health, the increasing suicide rate in our communities, and available resources. Depression and suicide is not easily detectable. There are no obvious signs, there are no classic cases, and everyone is different, and every circumstance is unique. I am grateful to the doctors, scholars, and programs that continue to be available 24/7. But we as a society must normalize the mental health crisis. We must normalize race relations, and we must normalize therapy for all trauma, all trauma. Therapy should become as common as a doctor's checkup or a bi-weekly visit to the salon for men, women, and children. As I grow my own online TV network focused on real issues and iconic people through in-depth interviews and groundbreaking content, I am proud to be in my purpose and bringing light to what I pray will ultimately save lives before it's too late, if only just one. Everyone, thank you so much. And join me this Wednesday, February 23rd at 8 p.m. as we discuss mental health and suicide prevention against African American children. You will not believe the statistics on this. You will not believe how young these babies are committing suicide. You will not believe how easily they're discussing it and how bullying and just common self-esteem issues is playing into us losing our children. So I want to thank you all. I want you to continue this conversation, continue it in your home, continue it with your therapist. Did anything come up for you in this conversation? Share. And if you do anything, if there's anyone that you know, if you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts or crisis, please reach out immediately to the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text HOME, HOME, to Crisis Text Line at 741-741. These services are free and confidential. Thank you guys so much. I am so honored, and this will not be the last conversation we have. This will not be it. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
night.
Good night, everybody.
I am going to share something with you right now.
When you look at me, what do you see? Now, I'm going to go through some of the things that I typically hear. To the very astute, I usually get I'm black, I'm bearded, and I'm strong. I also get I look like NBA superstar James Harden. I'm most definitely the poorer version. I get hip-hop superstar, Emmy Award winner, Donald Glover, AKA Childish Gambino. Yeah, that too, right? And last but not least, I get Curtis Jackson, AKA 50 Cent. Now, one of my goals is definitely to get rich or die trying. I think Sally Mae is putting the emphasis on or die trying. right? But see, what I don't hear is, Phil, you look like somebody that lives with depression and anxiety. Phil, you look like somebody that was suicidal for 15 years, every day, 5 to 6 times a day. They don't say, Phil, you look like somebody that was driving on Interstate 95, wanting to crash your car to end your life. No. Because see, here in America, when we think about mental health, we think about the homeless man who's walking the streets, talking nonsensically to themselves. We think about the white celebrity who takes their life via suicide. We think about the white mass murderer who goes into a high school and takes the lives of innocent children. Or it's usually your president who loves to tweet venom from the hip. But see, rarely does the conversation speak of a father of 2 kids, someone who possesses a master's in exercise science, a master's in social work, somebody pursuing a doctorate. Rarely is it a person of color. Rarely is it a black man like myself, until now, because black mental health matters. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is black mental health, and why is it differentiated amongst racial and ethnic lines? Black mental health are the individual and collective experiences that influence the wellness of a community. Trauma is the biggest influencer of black mental health. We're talking about historical trauma, slavery, Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, the Tuskegee experiment, up until present day trauma, when you see somebody that looks like you get killed in their home. Rest in peace, Botham Jean. When you see somebody who's living with mental wellness issues get killed by the police. Rest in peace, Laquan McDonald of Chicago, Illinois. Or when you see somebody that looks like you get killed by somebody that looks like you. Rest in peace, XXX Tentacion. See, when we talk about trauma, trauma is unique to the individual, and I'm no different. There were 3 impactful traumatic situations that I've experienced in my life outside of the genetic predisposition, because my grandmother lived with schizophrenia. I hearken back to being in 8th grade, 13 years of age. On the way to school, my mother has a nervous breakdown. She's crying. She's pulling at her clothes and her hair. She's cursing. I felt helpless because I couldn't help her, or I couldn't help myself. And see, I was expected to continue to go into school that day and achieve. It's funny, when I first started telling this story, I told my mother, listen, I'm telling the story of when you had a nervous breakdown. And she said, Phil, that didn't happen. Now, I know I'm getting older. I have a few grays, right? But I swear I remember that. And then she called me a week later and she said, Phil, I didn't know you remembered that. As if I wouldn't remember the most traumatic situation that I've experienced in my life. And that typically happens. We're often expected to just continue on because we are so resilient as a people. Because we do survive, and we've survived for hundreds of years. And I was expected to survive and go into school that day and perform. And I did. Because like many of us, I learned how to suppress my emotions and my feelings. But what if I didn't? What if I went into school and I started arguing with peers and fighting? What if I started arguing with the teachers? What if I did criminalistic behaviors within the community? Would I be deemed incorrigible and unable to be in the school setting, in the community setting? Or would anybody care that I just experienced this traumatic situation that has impacted me? Fast forward to my 12th grade year, 17 years of age, January 2001. My mother said, Phil, come downstairs. She said, Phil, your brother Bobby died. And I started crying. That was probably the only healthy coping skill that I had at the time, right? Because being a product of the hip-hop culture, hip-hop tells me when somebody dies, you either go out and get some liquor or you go get a rest in peace tattoo. Well, I wasn't old enough to drink. That would happen once I got to college, right? But I went out and I got this rest in peace tattoo. As if that was going to do something, if that was going to take away the pain of losing a primary relationship. It didn't. And people ask me, Phil, well, how did your brother die? Say, the opioid epidemic is popular now. But in the black community, in the hip hop community, especially amongst black male, it's always existed. He was one who liked to use codeine and Xanax. I don't know what he was trying to cope with. I will never know. I went to school that Monday because I didn't have anybody to say, Phil, stay home. Because my mother was going through it because she just lost her only child. And I went to school feeling all of this emotion. And I remember it like yesterday. I was sitting in computer class. Miss Williams, my computer teacher, came up to me, and I don't know what she said. She said, Phil, she could have said, Phil, what was the score of the Eagles game last night? I let her have it. I blacked on her. I cursed her out. Why? Because I had all this built up anger, all this built up rage. Because, see, when we're talking about depression and anxiety for black men especially, it doesn't look like somebody laying in bed for 6 and 7 days on end. No, it manifests itself through anger and rage. I ended up getting suspended that day. And Ms. Williams and I were able to laugh at the situation years later because I was able to cope with it and understand what I was feeling. But again, it was a moment in time that impacted my life. My third and final story happened at Bloomsburg University in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. Again, we remember traumatic situations, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I call it the Jew story, right? Because when I go fill out job applications and it says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? As long as it doesn't say misdemeanor or felony, I can ignore it if it says that. But if it says, have you ever been convicted of a crime, I have to check it off. And then I'll put, well, it all started with a cup of juice. And then the employers, they laugh like, oh, man. And I laugh like, ha, ha, ha. That's my life. So the Jew story is, I was coming from the gym to go get me something to eat. I got my food. I paid for it, emphasis on pay. And you know how you go to McDonald's, they give you a cup, and you can go to the fountain and get whatever drink you want. And I did that, and I tasted it to see if it was watered down. But see, when you go to a predominantly white institution like Bloomsburg University, it seems like they have all the minorities' names on a list. And the school police officer said, Phil, that's stealing. Mind blown. And me having this anger, this frustration that's built up over years of trauma, and me not being able to express myself in a healthy way, I blacked on her just like I did Miss Williams. Unbeknownst to me, that would lead to 20-plus charges. I ended up going to jail that night. I ended up getting expelled from school. I ended up doing a weekend in jail because, listen, they say you'll get judged by a jury of your peers. With the average age in that community being 60 and over, it wasn't going to be a jury of my peers. But I needed that experience. I needed it. And I needed it because it told me that, Phil, I have to do something different. I ended up appealing to get back into Bloomsburg University, and people knew me, so people wanted me back. And so I got back, and I was focused. One day, my psychology professor, Dr. Cambone Camara, God bless the dead, he said, Phil, come talk to me about anything, anytime. And I took him up on that. I went and talked to him, not to talk about school. I went to talk to him about a young lady I had been courting, right? And I wanted to understand, why didn't she want me? So I went to his office. I'm like, listen, I bought her sneakers. I took her to the movies. I took her to dinner. Well, my mom took her to dinner and all those things because I didn't have a job. Thanks, Mom. But he said to me, Phil, in life, you change to get something or to keep something. And I'm like, man, what are you talking about? Little did I know that would become my mantra, that I realized I had to change. I had to work on my wellness so I can be whole. It took approximately 10 years, because that's the average length of time that they say somebody who lives with mental wellness issues, that's the time that it takes for them to come to grips with it and to seek treatment. For black people, I think it's much longer. And so within those 10 years, I've been on medication, which quelled the suicidal ideations. They're no more. I go to therapy every week. Hi, Dr. Val. It's been so critical for me in my wellness because I decided to go from living to thriving. To my black brothers and sisters, you too deserve to go from living to thriving. We no longer have to wear the mask. We're survivors. There's help now. We can get help and walk out there with our heads held high and get the treatment that we need so we can go from living to thriving. To my non-black brothers and sisters, will you now view the black person that you come in contact with and might be in a negative way? And recognize that, you know what, they might have gone through something. Or to see them when they excel, what they had to go through to get to that point. Or will mental health continue to be viewed in America as Kate Spade, as Anthony Bourdain, as Chester Bennington, as Robin Williams? Would it now include actors Sam Sarpong, Lee Thompson Young? Will it now include 10-year-old Ashanti Davis, who took her life because of bullying? Would now represent Emmanuel Sloan, who's the reason why I'm here, because at 19 years of age, he decided to take his life by jumping in front of a train. This isn't an indictment on you or on America. This is just a public service announcement that's stating that we're here and we deserve to live and to thrive. Thank you.